The thinking pattern that I'm going to talk about today used to be a regular road to ruin for me. Learning how to change it turned out to be key, both to sustaining a recovery from depression, but also to enjoying and thriving in everyday life. It also helped me to improve my relationships and to experience more of a sense of flow in the world. It's quite a simple thinking error, and lots of us do it. I learned about it for the first time when I did cognitive therapy, and it's also an incredibly easy change to make. There's good evidence that making that change will improve your happiness, and it certainly did for me. I'll show you exactly how you do it in a few minutes. First of all, what is it? Well, the idea is really simple. There's a word in the English language that we could do with thinking or using a lot less. And that word is should. Should can be a bit of a disaster from a happiness perspective. Let me illustrate with a few examples, and these are all things that I used to think. I should have put the bins out last night. There should be better mental health provision in this country. That person should go on a date with me. You should know better than to say that. You should tidy your room. I used to think all of these things. Indeed, I used to regularly boss myself around with should. Now those are just a few examples, and you might be using that word or other similar words for many, many different reasons. The problem is that none of them are actually very realistic, and they're not healthy statements that are going to help you with your happiness. Why not? Well, if you think about it, each one is judgmental, each one jars with the world, it grates up against the way that things actually are. Remember how I talked about thoughts creating your mood in another video? And eventually those thoughts lead to a broken brain, you're pumping cortisol in there, and you gradually get to the point where you're burned out. So whether you're aware of it or not, every time you use the word should, your body tends to be spewing out just a little bit of that stress hormone, maybe cortisol, for example. And each time you say or think one of those thoughts, it's going to actually slightly tire you out and slightly start to wear you out. It's actually amazing how bad cortisol is for the brain. And it's a fabulously bad news, actually, if you keep pumping it out into your system. It can absolutely lead to depression. And I'll come back and talk about some of the things that cortisol and other stress hormones do at a sort of neurochemistry level in another video. So let's take a look at these statements and just think about what is realistic and what isn't about each one. I should have put the bins out last night. So you didn't do it, you get to feel bad, you get to judge yourself for having forgotten something. But the reality of the situation, the fact is, you didn't do it. There is no point whatsoever in feeling bad about it because you can't go back and change it. Nor is it some massive high crime that you deserve to be chastised for. In fact, chastising yourself regularly is a terrible motivator. It's just a simple mistake. And to make mistakes is to be human. We all do it. It's a fundamental part of our nature. Now we can choose to accept that part of our nature, and we can choose to embrace it rather than going down the route of being judgmental. It's much better to say, I could have put the bins out last night. You can actually say that statement with a smile on your face, and I think you'll be just as likely to remember next time to put the bins out as if you'd gone and chastised yourself. Only this time you don't have any of the negative emotions that come from kind of pointlessly looking back on this situation that you can't change. So my next statement in the set of examples I did, there should be better mental health provision in this country. Now I remember thinking that, particularly when I was falling through the cracks in the system and I wasn't doing very well. Again though, thinking like that creates frustration. It takes me away from being a place where I'm taking responsibility for where I am and looking at what I can do to bring about a better situation, to blaming the world. And it puts me at odds with something that I can't immediately change. Now don't misunderstand me. I think it is super important that we do have better mental health provision in this country and in other countries. And I truly believe that it would be in everybody's interest to do that. And I certainly support that it can happen, and I would certainly campaign for it to happen. But this is about how we go about doing it. Whether we illustrate the positives, whether we support people trying to do that, whether we encourage it, whether we provide evidence, or whether we shut down the debate by throwing out judgments. It's a really good way to get people's backs up and to make it difficult to actually make progress. And you can extend this specific example to all the other sorts of government organizations or commercial organizations or bureaucrats that aren't doing what you want, whatever that category is. Whatever group it is that's doing something that you don't like, it often fits in here with this should statement. The fact is, individually, we don't have much control over these things day to day. It's not to say that we're powerless. It's more powerful, though, to look at how things could be, and it's more energizing, and it's ultimately much more effective. So don't give away your power by demanding or berating things into being better. Instead, engage with issues on a positive level. Use exciting and positive statements that will inspire energy in you and others around you. It will create acceptance, it will create positive change, and less fear of failure. Here's another way to think about it. A lot of these systems and procedures that you don't like are there to serve a lot of people and not just you. So if you could magic up a creation to change the system so that it was exactly what you want, if you came up with a perfect universal rule to solve some piece of bureaucracy or some letdown, would other people all see it like that? Would everybody see it in the same way? And would everybody be happy, or would others think that the world should be different? You see, I think the thing is that people are generally doing the best they know how to do with the information that they have at any given time. And that goes for you too. So here's another one of my examples. This person should go on a date with me. It's almost a little hard to believe that I actually even believed that sentence about anyone at any point. And yet at one point in my life I did, and I remember, and I can say it with a bit of a smile on my face now, but it actually contributed to months of heartache. I like this example because it's so easy to look on it and see it as a little bit ridiculous now. Again, I was trying to change something that I have no control over. You can see from the example the futility of using should. It's obvious and it's easy to see here because it's such an extreme case. You can't should somebody to go on a date with you or to start loving with you. That isn't how any of that works. Yet in reality, we use this sentiment in other milder cases, all of them equally ineffective, and we don't actually notice. We could rephrase it. Would you like to go on a date with me? Wouldn't it be great to go on a date? These statements are far more likely to get a positive response. If it's a yes, then great, and if it's no, it's much easier for me to move on. Shifting my belief system here was one of the ways that I started to correct rumination. There were others on that whole subject. Rumination is a complicated thing, and there were some brain-based issues that I also had to address, and I'll return to those in another video, but this was a really important piece of the puzzle. You should know better to say that. Well, again, the reality is that in that moment of time, whoever you've just said that to, they didn't. Now, that doesn't make them a bad person. And saying that immediately puts whatever you're talking to them about on the defensive. It causes the other person to feel pressured, it causes them to feel resentful. The fact is they didn't know better, or they wouldn't have done whatever it is that you're unhappy about them doing. Instead, use neutral language like I feel X or I experienced Y. It's much more constructive, and it's much more realistic because it truthfully describes what you experienced, whilst giving space for the other person to understand their impact on your experience in a far less confrontational way. You give yourself or the other person a choice, and a chance to feel good about making that choice. And if you think about it, we all do have a choice, whether or not we use should to try to take it away. Now, should isn't the only way to achieve the same negative, cortisol-pumping, neuron-destroying effect in your brain. It's a sentiment, and it sits hidden behind a few other ways we might think or act. So some of the other phrases to look out for, we can also use must or ought to achieve the same terrible results. Other statements that manage the same trick include it's your fault, or you have no right, or I don't like X. In fact, I don't like X is one of my favorites because it's usually a should statement in disguise. That's because you're saying that something should be different to what actually is. As you start to look for should, you can get better and better at spotting these things too. You're not just looking for that word, you're looking for that sentiment or that feeling, and whether that's a mild feeling or a strong feeling, whether it's subtle or whether it's really pronounced, that's what you're going to try to find. And you're going to become a lot happier if you can find ways to replace that. Another way that we often use this phrase is when we try to create perfectionism. I used to be a terrible public speaker, and I remember telling myself, I must get used to speaking in public, or I should be able to speak in public without fear. I ought to be more comfortable. Yet these are all further unrealistic statements that actually make it almost impossible to learn to speak in public because you've taken a situation that's already high pressure and you've added pressure on top of it. By adding pressure to a situation where you're already feeling like that, in this case public speaking, then instead of being your own best friend, what you're doing is you're kind of throwing fuel onto the flames. The irony is that all of those thoughts then exacerbate this very flight or fight response that you're trying to control so hard when you step up on the stage to speak. Look what happens when you replace the language in these statements. I'd like to get used to speaking in public. One day I could be able to speak in public without fear. It's okay to be uncomfortable in speaking in public at this stage of my life. All of those statements feel completely different, and they're simply more realistic. They reflect the reality of the situation far better. Instead of putting yourself under a whole ton of pressure to pretend to be magically something that you're not yet, you're now becoming a friend to yourself. So in the same way that you would encourage or support somebody else, this language helps you to do the same for you. Nor does it in any way reduce your ambition to do something. It won't reduce your ambition to learn to do public speaking, and in fact, it may have quite the reverse effect. I think it's very important that we choose to treat ourselves just as we would a close friend or loved one. Doing so really helps to build your own view of yourself too, and ultimately your own self-esteem. Now, if you're not entirely convinced, perhaps you're thinking that in using should statements you're being moral, or you're standing up for a belief system or for something that's right. If you do think that you are upholding a rule or a moral judgment, you could ask yourself, do you really believe all the others would see that rule in the same way? And are you certain that what you're upholding is what was actually originally intended in that rule? And even if you are right, is it possible that doing it in this shouldy way is actually counterproductive? You see, while it's true that there can be some benefit to using a should statement, we need to weigh that up against the cost. Do you think that by being difficult, strict, or demanding, you're going to really motivate other people? Could it be there are other ways to get your message across that are much more effective? Or do you believe that you should get everybody's approval, or you should be perfect? That might motivate you to try really hard in a given situation, but it's also a trap. And there are other ways to motivate yourself that are not so judgmental. I am amazing, and I could be even more amazing. I'd love to be even better, even though I fail from time to time. These are much more realistic statements, and think about how much more motivating those things are. They're much more realistic. They help you to accept who you are and then to build step by step on that. Now, I'm not saying that there's never ever a time to use the word. I think I personally would probably be willing to say that you probably shouldn't choose to drive really dangerously, for example. But those uses are really very few and far between. If you're still not convinced, I invite you to spend 10 minutes just now doing a simple cost-benefit analysis. Now, this comes from cognitive therapy, and it's quite a useful tool because it helps you to untangle your thoughts. And the way it works is that it basically reflects the fact that it's sometimes quite hard for us to grasp all of the pros and cons in a complex argument in your head at once. So just grab a piece of paper and write down 2 headings: benefits of using should on the left and disadvantages of using should on the right. You draw a line down the middle of the page and then list everything that you can think of under each heading on each side of the page. Do the benefits really outweigh the disadvantages? You can rank each one out of 10 if you like and add up all of the arguments. So yes, there are benefits to using should, but do they really win out? Because the thing is, you can't have it both ways. The goal with any of these cognitive therapy exercises is to work out which way is better. So if you're not sure, feel free to pause the video just now and take a few minutes to do that exercise, and then turn it back on, and I'm going to tell you how to make this change if that is what you want to do. So if you agree that it's good to see if you can reduce should, must, or ought to, or I don't like, I'm going to tell you how to do it. If you're not sure, my suggestion to you is that you could try this as an experiment and see whether you like what happens. It really, really worked for me. What you want to do is spend the next few days working hard to spot should statements and feelings when you're talking or when you're thinking. If you can catch it, swap it with could or with other similarly neutral language. Do the same with any other language that might mean the same thing, like ought to or must or I don't like or have to. Now, change like this only works if you can find a way to make it an ingrained automatic habit. What I mean by that is that rather than having to catch yourself each time and then correct your use of language, you want to get to a place where your brain simply stops generating these sorts of thoughts most of the time all by itself. It's It's not realistic to simply remember and change these sorts of thinking patterns that you've had and that have come naturally to you for years and years. Your thinking is kind of a bit like water flowing through a well-worn riverbed. You know, it knows where it's supposed to go. It goes down that channel. So what you have to do is you have to make a little bit of an effort to dig out a new channel. Once you've dug out that new channel, the water flows that way, and as it does, it helps to make that channel strong and just as well-worn as the original thinking patterns. Now that analogy is actually probably not too far off some of the actual brain chemistry involved. We create highways in the brain of sets of well-worn connections between neurons as we use particular thinking patterns. However, I digress. I'll come back to that in another video. So we need to inject just a little effort into making this change. And what I'm going to say here, it may sound contrived, but in practice it's actually fun, it's easy, and it's pretty much essential. So here's one way of doing it. Set your phone to go off 3 times a day, and you're only going to be doing this for the next week, just a timer on your phone. And each time it does, just take yourself away from today's activities or take yourself out of the room. Spend just 5 minutes reflecting on when you've used should or ought to or one of the others in the past few hours. And just think about it mentally in your head, you know, I could swap that for could, or I'd like to, or wouldn't it be great if. You can create maybe a little score each time, so maybe open the notes app on your phone and just keep track of, you know, in the last 4 hours I said should 4 times, and you know, each time you do that, see if you can reduce that score a little bit over last time. So treat it a little bit like a game. It's important to be very gentle with yourself, but at the same time you also need to be quite persistent. If you're in kind of more stressful situation, you know, like you're stuck in traffic or something like that, you might find that you go a bit backwards at first. But don't worry, just make a note and see if you can do better next time. So there may be some lumps and bumps in the scores that you're keeping, but if you stick to it, the numbers overall will start to go down. Try to be really honest with yourself. Try to spot any use of the language or any moment when you told yourself that you must do something, and so on. And don't focus on other people, just make this change for yourself. If you do this work for a week or so, you will magically start to make it a habit. In essence, you'll find that you've rewired your brain. You'll catch yourself using language that's this sort of must-do language less and less. The beautiful thing about this is that you might only need to do this experiment once in your life, or perhaps a handful of times in your life to change this pattern for good. You get to the point where you're almost never using should or must. Instead, you'll be thinking about what you and other people could do or might do. Frustration will drop off, and each time you'll be free to make a choice or not to choose to do something, all for very positive reasons, rather than kind of clobbering yourself on the head or somebody else over the head with shoulding. As it becomes natural, you may well notice that you feel quite a bit less frustrated with yourself or with other people in the world at large. This is an effective technique to take a lot of pressure off, to improve your relationships with others, and so to reduce anxiety and to reduce depression. The less often your own thoughts stress you out, the more your brain has a chance to recover from depression and anxiety and to experience joy and flow, as I said at the start of the video. I found that this and other similar techniques help me to go far more gently in this world. And they've helped me to build up my self-esteem and helped me to motivate myself and to motivate others. I do promise you though that if you don't do the experiment, if you don't set the alarm and keep track of this for a few days, it's almost impossible to change. You can't, unfortunately, just watch this video and wish for a change. Your brain just doesn't work like that. You have to go to the trouble of doing the exercise for a week or so in order to kickstart this new habit. So I encourage you to give it a go, and I do think that you'll be glad that you did. I'll give you plenty more techniques to work on in future videos, including other methods of helping to rewire your brain and other methods of installing more realistic thinking patterns. Let me know how you get on in the comments below. If this was useful to you, then please like the video to help it share it to others. And if you haven't already, then please subscribe, as I've got lots more exciting content to come. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.